Concord Prison Experiment. That was the other thing that Timothy Leary did. So what he said was that, people talk about their mystical experiences, and then maybe they can say how that's changed their lives, but that's sort of subjective. But if we can give psilocybin to prisoners and then help them have these pro-social experiences, work through their traumas, and then when they're released, then we can reduce their recidivism. They will now be ready to make a new reentry into society, and that's an objective thing. So the next thing that Timothy Leary decided to do was the Concord Prison Experiment. And this was a tremendous experiment. And they gave about 35 people psilocybin experiences inside prison. Timothy Leary and others, the researchers would go into the prison, and half the researchers would also take psilocybin.
Whoa.
And with the prisoners in prison. And this was a way to try to help them to reduce the experimenter, experimentee kind of idea. And the Concord Prison Experiment was considered to be one of the most successful psychedelic experiences and studies of the 60s that ever there was. And unfortunately, all the records were lost of who was in the experiment. So after I did the Good Friday experiment follow-up, after 25 years and found 19 out of the 20, I went to Tim and others and do you have any idea who was in the Concord Prison Experiment? And they had no records whatsoever. So I didn't think I could do anything. 1991, I published a paper in the Journal of Transpersonal Psychology about the Good Friday experiment, and there was an editorial in the Boston Globe about it, op-ed. And I got a call afterwards from a fellow, Michael Forcier, and he said that he worked for the Department of Corrections, and they had a special room where they collect the records of their famous and interesting prisoners. Like they had Malcolm X and his records and others. And they had the records of all the people from the Concord Prison Experiment. And he said, would you like to do a follow-up study? I said, I would love to do it. And it took us a whole year to get permission. We had to go all the way up to the governor. It was Governor Weld at the time. And the paper that came back was hilarious that said that we got permission because somebody had scribbled on it, no psilocybin. Like we were not planning to give psilocybin. We were just going to look at their prison records, but they were like, no psilocybin, for sure.
That's funny.
It was just...
imagine if they had done psilocybin. They would have never written that.
They would not have.
Never. It's only people that haven't done it. They must be curious.
Well, I have had a lot of good conversations with DEA people and police because what they're taught about drugs, if they believe it, nobody would ever do these drugs.
Right.
And so
why is everyone doing it if they're not awesome?
If they're horrible. So I've tried to explain to them, and I did it when I was legal. But you try to do it in a way where you don't encourage them to react in a negative way. So I did this follow-up to the Concord Prison Experiment. All right, so while I'm doing this experiment and tracking people's criminal justice system records in the decades, this was like a 34-year follow-up, it started becoming clear to me that the experiment wasn't a success. But it was, and I was the one that was like wanting to do the follow-up to bring attention to it because I thought it was a success.
Now, here's a thought. Were these people still in jail or were they free?
Some of them were in jail, some of them were in jail, some of them were free. But what I discovered was a trick that Leary had done to try to make the results look good. Oh. And then it was like, and the trick is simple, is that just think about this. When you're in jail, the first day that you get off jail, you probably have nobody goes back to jail. But if you look 2 years out,
right,
more people will have had a chance to commit crimes or go back to jail. So the longer you're out of jail, the more likely you are to go back. So the group of people that had been in this experiment had been, on average, they'd been out of jail 10 months when they looked at their recidivism. Some had been longer, some had been shorter. And the researchers, Ralph Metzner and Tim Leary, they had done a base rate study of all the people that got released from the Concord Prison Experiment in the years before they did it. And they published their results. So they compared it. It was a little bit historical, but so things don't always stay the same exactly in history, but that was the best that they could do to compare it. But what I discovered is that they had published the results of this base rate study in a really obscure journal, a British criminology journal. And, I had to go down in the dusty libraries of Harvard Law Library, the Widener Library, to even find this journal. And when I read it, what I learned is that they had taken data from people that were out of prison for 30 months and compared it to people that were out of prison for 10 months. Complete scientific fraud. And so then I'm like, shit, how is it that all the people that hate psychedelics didn't discover this? And everybody has thought, including me, that this is a great experiment and tremendously successful. And now what do I do? And I'm like, I've got to report what I find.
Yeah.
So I ended
So
up.
what were they pretending they had done?
They were pretending to have reduced recidivism. Then they were also pretending that
By a significant amount?
by a substantial amount. Yeah. The far,
And they were just monkeying with the numbers.
Yeah. Well, the farther away it was in time from the original experiment, the better the results were reported over and over in time. So what they'd also said is that some of the people that had gone back to prison who'd gotten psilocybin didn't go back to prison for new crimes. They'd gone back because they had violated their probation.